Today's video is going to focus on the choices authors make when they write. Author's choice. Writers write to hold up a mirror through which we readers can better understand ourselves, who we are, why we are who we are. Writers write to allow we readers a glimpse through a window so that we can look out and better understand who other people are and why they are who they are. Mirrors and windows. Writers write because they want to share a message, an idea. Writers have a point that they want to make, and often writers want to convince readers to think about a subject differently. They want to break through stereotypes, maybe, or send a message about how to live a life better than the life that we are living. They want readers to understand a truth about life that they have discovered. Writers make choices to accomplish these messages. We call these messages themes, these ideas that writers are trying to communicate. Writers make choices as they're building their novel or their essay or their short story or their poem, whatever they're writing. Writers make a lot of choices. A writer is going to decide how to introduce characters and what kind of first impression those characters should make on the reader. Writers decide how to arrange the events of the plot, which event they'll reveal first, second, last. We saw Jeanette Walls starting with the end of her book, showing Jeanette as an adult and very successful, and then flashing back to when Jeanette is only 3 years old and is cooking hot dogs and is brutally burned. Why did she decide to do that? Why did she decide to tell us readers right away from the beginning that Jeanette Walls makes it? It's a decision that Jeanette Walls made as she was writing this book. Writers decide how to begin and end the piece of writing, how the beginning or end will help to deliver the message or the theme that they have in mind. Writers decide how characters should behave, what they should say, how they should react, what they should look like. Writers decide how the setting should be described, among other things. Writers make choices about the best way to make the message or the theme that they're trying to share clear. We as readers notice what an author is doing. We notice the decision an author is making, and this leads us to better understand the piece of literature and the author's message. One kind of decision that an author makes is deciding to include contrasts and contradictions. If something contrasts or contradicts, that means it's the opposite of what one would expect to happen, or the opposite of what should happen. As a good reader, if you notice a contrast or a contradiction showing up in what you are reading, you should stop and you should notice that contrast or that contradiction. And you should wonder about it. So when you're reading and a character says or does something that is opposite, it contradicts what he or she has been saying or doing all along, or it contradicts what society generally expects as accepted behavior, we need to stop and we need to notice the contrast and ask ourselves, why is the character doing this? Why did the author write it this way? What am I supposed to get from this? What am I supposed to understand because of this? Let's practice this a little bit. I want us to notice two things. I want us to notice how Jeanette Walls has chosen to introduce her mom. What's the first impression she creates of her mom? How does she introduce mom? And then we're going to do the same thing and notice, how does Jeanette Walls introduce dad? And while we're looking at the choices Jeanette Walls made about how to introduce these characters, we're also going to be looking for contrasts. Join me. I'm going to start on the first page. It's not numbered. It has that part 1, a woman on the street. And as I started reading, the first thing that I noticed was this woman on the street, it was her mother. But she didn't say my mother on the street. She said a woman. That word choice has an effect. That's a choice Jeanette Walls made. Jeanette Walls could have chosen to say my mother, but she says a woman. It seems more distant. It seems more cold. Like, ooh, there's problems here. There's relationship problems here. And then if we turn the page, look on page 3, I want us to look at how Jeanette Walls chooses to introduce her mother. I'm going to read you just some of the lines describing mom. The first one, she's wondering, I'm sitting in a taxi wondering if I'm overdressed for the evening. And I look out the window and saw mom rooting through a dumpster. That's our first impression of mom, digging through a dumpster. If I go to the next paragraph, second line, a second sentence, she had tied rags around her shoulders. In that paragraph, we get additional descriptions of Mom. Her long hair was streaked with gray, tangled and matted. Her eyes had sunk deep into their sockets. But still, she reminded me of the Mom that she had been when I was a kid, swan diving off cliffs, painting in the desert, reading Shakespeare. I'm noticing a contrast here. First of all, I don't expect Mom to be homeless digging through the dumpster, right? I expect Mom to be taking care of me, right? Cooking me cookies, right? But here we have Mom homeless digging through the dumpster. She's got gray, tangled, matted hair. Yet, she's swan diving off cliffs, which seems extremely graceful, elegant, adventurous, exciting. She's painting in the desert. And she's reading Shakespeare. Shakespeare! Doesn't smart people read Shakespeare? There's a contrast. We wouldn't expect a homeless woman to be reading Shakespeare. At the end of that paragraph, Mom is described as one of the homeless people in New York City. And then we get description of Jeanette Walls. Here's how Jeanette Walls chooses to introduce herself. She says that she lives on Park Avenue. She has a doorman. She has an elevator man. Her heels are clicking on the polished wood floor. If I turn to page 4, she tells us that she's wearing pearls and living on Park Avenue while her parents were keeping warm and finding something to eat out on the streets. So here's a contrast too. We wouldn't expect the child of a homeless mother to be so wealthy and so elegant. I'm not quite sure what to make of this yet. What does Jeanette Walls want me to think about Mom at this point? But I am aware of the first impression. Jeanette Walls wants me to know things about Mom, and these are the things she wants me to know. Let's take a look at how Dad is introduced. I'm going to turn a few pages. I'm going to go to page 12, where we first meet Dad. In the middle of page 12, we get the first impression of Dad. He's walking into the hospital room. Everyone always turned and stared at Dad. I couldn't figure out whether it was because he was so handsome or because he called people partner and Goomba and threw his head back when he laughed. On the next page, we get some more description of Dad on page 13, the top half of the page. Jeanette Walls says that she likes the way Dad told stories. Even though she's heard stories many times, these same stories over and over, she still likes the way he tells stories. We also hear about Dad. He didn't trust hospitals. Near the bottom of page 13, there are some more of those ideas. Dad got into an argument with the doctor. It started because Dad thought I shouldn't be wearing bandages. Burns need to breathe, he told the doctor. He told the doctor that I was going to be scarred for life because of him, but by God, I wasn't the only one who was going to walk out of there scarred. And then Dad threatens the doctor. So what kind of first impressions are you thinking about Dad at this point? We see that Jeanette really likes her dad, admires him, thinks he's fun and funny, but we also see Dad threatening the doctor and seeming to think that he knows better than the doctor. Are we seeing some arrogance on Dad's side? Or does Dad really know better than the doctor? However, him threatening the doctor, that gives a negative impression of Dad, that it feels like, nah, you don't know better than the doctor. Turn the page to page 14. Here's the last impression we get on this page of Dad. He unhooked my right arm from the sling over my head. As he held me close, I breathed in his familiar smell of Vitalis, that's like hair gel, whiskey, and cigarette smoke. It reminded me of home. For me, this is a really powerful description of Dad, that he smells like whiskey. And it's the first impression we get that perhaps there's a bit of a drinking problem going on here. And it reminds Jeanette of home, like it's a very familiar, that's what home smells like the whiskey. At the end of this chapter, we have Dad checking Jeanette out from the hospital, Rex Walls style. Did you wonder why he did that? That's a contrast too, isn't it? We wouldn't expect Dad to scoop her out of the hospital bed and run out of the hospital with her. He's trying to avoid the bill, right? He doesn't want to pay the bill. So that's why he's checking out Rex Walls style, not to pay that bill. But he says at the very end, "You're safe now." How do you respond? When you read that, did you think, yeah, she is safe now? Or was your reaction like, oh, Nellie, I think you might have been better off in the hospital? Good readers know that writers write with a purpose in mind. They have a message that they're trying to share. And our job as a reader is to try to figure out what that message is. The first way that good readers try to figure that out is notice those contrasts and contradictions. What is happening here that seems unlikely, or that I don't expect, or that society wouldn't expect? Notice the contrasts and contradictions, and that's going to help you pick out the main points. Many of you do that naturally. You don't even have to think about it. You just naturally do it. So that's the first thing. Good readers look for contrasts and contradictions. Good readers also know that writers write with a purpose. They have a message, a theme, and I can use any of those words to describe it. Purpose, message, theme. They have something that they are trying to say. A comment about life, an observation about life. And our job as readers is to try to figure it out. We might not always agree with the observation or the message about life that the author is sending. And it's also our job to decide if we agree or disagree, to be our own thinkers, to be careful thinkers. But first, we know that writers write with a purpose. They make choices to achieve that purpose. How am I going to introduce a character? What kind of setting am I going to have? Where am I going to start the story? Where am I going to end the story? And as we read, we notice those stories. They all add up together. And by the time we get to the end, we're able to talk about what is the theme, think about what is the theme, and maybe even be impacted, be changed ourselves by what an author has said.